Thank you for joining me. This is Barry Shaw from the Israel Institute of Strategic Studies here in Israel. I want to talk to you about the recent Israeli election, which was an unusual one this year. I can give you some personal anecdotes. I would say that quite a majority of Israelis were going to the poll without having decided which party they were going to vote for. The strange thing about the Israelis is they're some of the most outspoken and affirmative people you'll ever meet. But when going into the elections, they were really unsure about where they were going to go. And in the end, we going into this election with almost 40 parties. There were 39 parties. This is the Israeli politics here. It's the most complex elections you'll find anywhere in the world. And what we ended up with a 11 party Knesset, and the votes ended up with the Likud, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, with a very narrow lead over the Blue and White Party, headed by Benny Gantz. The Likud is a center-right party. Blue and White presented themselves as a center-left party, and these two parties, the Likud had 36 seats and the Blue and White with 35. There was no other party in double figures. The next largest party was Shas with 8 seats, the United Torah, which is a Orthodox religious party, with 7. And then we had a Arab Hadash group of Arab party with 6 seats, Labour, which is now the Zionist Union, with 6, Israel Beitenu, this is the party of Avigdor Lieberman, with 5 seats, the right-wing Union with 5, Meretz was far left with 4, Kulanu, this is Moshe Kahlon, who was the economic minister, with 4, and another Arab party called Balad with 4 as well. How do I describe what happened here in the elections? I think at the end of the day, it was between the two major parties of the Likud and the new party of the Blue and White. And the whole issue, I think, was basically one of security and economy. Israel has been suffering recently over consistent rioting from Gaza, Hamas rockets, Palestinian terrorism, threats from Iran, threats from over our borders in Syria and with borders with Lebanon, and and of course the Gaza border, and the Israelis are very concerned about the security issue. They're also very interested and concerned about the economy. The Israeli economy is growing, is prosperous, but also there's a social problem over here where cost of living is going up a lot. And these were the things. And I think what happened here also in the elections is a lot of people, when it got to the polling booth, the uncertainties lifted and they went back to the roots. And as evidence of that, we can see that Shas, as I mentioned, is a party of the Sephardi Jews. And the Sephardi Jews decided, when in the polling booth, to go back to their roots and vote as Sephardi Jews for the Sephardi party. The religious people voted for the religious party. So now we have potentially a center-right government with 65 seats, as opposed to a center-left opposition with 55 seats. So Benjamin Netanyahu will be tasked in cobbling together a coalition government with some of the minor parties. Now, some people are asking me, well, why don't they go into a coalition with Benny Gantz's Blue and White? 2 reasons for this. First of all, Benny Gantz had said that he would not bring his party into a coalition with the Likud, with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, potentially facing indictments on certain corruption charges. Where are we on that issue? We're at the point now where the Attorney General is not bringing charges yet or indictments yet against the Prime Minister. They he has to wait and first of all have a hearing in which the lawyers representing the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, will go into a series of meetings with the Attorney General, going over the so-called evidence that he has and rebut it. And based on this, then the Attorney General will then decide whether he is going to press charges or indict the Prime Minister on any of the so-called corruption charges. Even if we got to that stage, I would suggest that the Prime Minister's lawyers would argue the point that, in fact, an indictment can only be brought against the Prime Minister, or court hearings would be imposed against the Prime Minister when he leaves office. This is rather similar to a situation you have in America, where for 2 years the Democrats have been chasing Donald Trump with the Russian collusion charges, and they've been wiretapping and find anything they can in order to impeach the president. Well, after a special counsel, Robert Mueller's special counsel, there was no indictment, no instructions or anything. But what's going on in the Congress is the Democrat senators are now demanding to look into Donald Trump's tax records, him and his family or whatever, in order to find anything in order to impeach him. Now, even if they found something about this, you hear in America that they have laws in America which says that the president can only be impeached, can only face court appearances or charges after he's left office. So we can put that aside, I suggest, for now, and look to the future. So what we have, as I said now, is potentially going to be a centre-right party, although President Rivlin, he will try to knock heads together and have Benny Gantz and climb down from the tree that he's put himself in to create a coalition, or have Benjamin Netanyahu agree to have a coalition government with the Blue and White Party. That may be desirable. Based on the fact that we're coming down on us once a government has been formed, will be the Trump administration peace proposals. This is the peace agreements between Israel and the Palestinians. And of course, the main issue of that is going to be, of course, security. You know, I said to somebody the other day that what we're seeing being played out right now is what I call the Jewish condition. The Jewish condition going back centuries, because I'm starting to hear already that if Bibi, the prime minister, creates a coalition with the religious party and a couple of the right-wing parties, Israel suddenly becomes a fascist, racist, evil empire. But the Jewish condition is this sort of allegation against us goes back centuries, but it's as relevant today as it was in the days of the blood libels and the pogroms. The blood libels is evil, is Israel is an evil, a racist regime, and electing Bibi proves this. And the pogroms today are Palestinian terror, Hamas rockets attack, international condemnation, the Iranian threat to wipe the Jewish state off the map, anything to makes the Jewish state into a pariah. This is something that Jews have been familiar with for centuries. So that is why security and self-identification won the day in the election. Not by any chance that the Likud message was one of right and strength. If people would accuse Israel or whatever government that Benjamin Netanyahu would form would be a racist, far-right, fascist sort of country, I would suggest these people look at the Indian elections that have just started. This is a long process. Israel is a nation of 8 million people. India is a nation of 900 million people. But look at the Indian condition. Modi is running to be re-elected, demanding that India be considered as an independent country, a patriotic Indian country, a nationalist Indian country. They have their issues with the Hindus and with Pakistan and others, but nobody accused India of being a far-right, racist, fascist state. The same condition applies here to Israel. But coming on to the peace plan, because this is going to be interesting. I've heard that the Trump administration peace plan will be declared somewhere around May the 15th. Now, what would it consist of, and what are the benefits or perils for Israel? First of all, rumor has it, obviously there's no information being given, but I've spoken to people who, like myself, are in the strategic industries, think tanks, things like this. We suggest it will not outright call for a two-state solution, but it will prescribe pathways for the creation of two states. There's a difference there, a subtle difference there. We think it won't call for a fair or just solution by Palestinian refugees, though it will, for instance, denounce the way this issue has been dealt with by both the United Nations and Arab countries. It'll address issues of security like borders, refugees, as I mentioned, the status of Jerusalem, Gaza, and some of the ideas that will be, I suggested, raised when we get to that stage is that, one, talking about Gaza, that Gaza Strip to be governed by the Palestinian Authority. I think if there's going to be any territorial things, I think what we're going to find is that the Trump administration will declare that in the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, the Palestinian areas A and B as designated in the Oslo Accord will be under Palestinian Authority control as it is today, and certain parts of Area C, which according to the Oslo Accord again, was granted for full Israeli administrative and security control until a permanent peace agreement. Part of that, probably about 10%, would be ceded to the Palestinians. So that 90% of the so-called West Bank would be given to the Palestinians as a state. Notice here, I'm not taking sides, I'm talking sort of dispassionately about what is likely to come out of this. I think there's been a problem also of talking about the Palestinians having in Jerusalem, and the Israeli governments have said that there is no way that Jerusalem would be divided, and Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish state of Israel. But I think what you might be hearing of this is the Palestinian capital will be near Jerusalem. In other words, the part of Jerusalem that would include places where predominantly Arab citizens live, places like Shuafat to Essaouira, Abu Dis, and to Jabal Mukata. And I think that might be a way that they're trying to get over this this logjam we've got of saying Jerusalem will not be divided. They will call these places non-Jerusalem, if you want to call it that, and the places where they are predominantly, again, Arably populated. I think they may be calling on an international body to oversee a joint Palestinian Authority and Israeli administration governing the Jerusalem Holy Basin, that they would call it, which includes the old city of Jerusalem. Don't know how successful that's going to be. Certainly they will talk about a joint Palestinian Authority and Jordan control over what they would call the Islamic sanctuaries. That would mean, I suppose, the two mosques on the Temple Mount, though they're not the Temple Mount itself, which should be open to Jews as well, Jews and Muslims, because the Temple Mount was the site of the ancient Jewish temples. And it's going to go broader than that, because Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, I think, will be brought in order to play their part in such a Trump administration. I think that, in fact, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon will be asked to give more citizenships rights to the Palestinians who are resident and even born in those countries. This is part of the issue of solving what is called the ridiculous Palestinian refugee issue. The refugees will be going nowhere back to anywhere, but they would be able to reside in where they live and to be either under the Palestinian Authority or become citizens of Lebanon, of Jordan, or of Egypt, and that these countries can allow them to become Palestinians, but only Palestinians governed by the Palestinian Authority, wherever that administration would have its center. Now, the Jewish residents may be in some of the smaller West Bank Judean settlements will probably be asked to be located elsewhere within Judea. In other words, part of Area C, which would remain under Israeli sovereignty. The peace plan, I would suggest, would also call for a land passage connecting called the West Bank, which would be the Palestinian territory, with Gaza. Gaza will be written down as the Gaza Strip to join the so-called new state of Palestine when the Palestinian Authority regains control of the Gaza Strip. In other words, as long as Gaza remains under Hamas, it would be outlawed as any part of a permanent peace agreement. Significant, in fact, gigantic economic aid. I've heard a figure of something like $40 billion would be given to the Palestinian Authority or the leadership of this new Palestine if it comes. Basically, that sum, when you work it out this way, will be $25,000 per Palestinian resident of the West Bank. Quite considerable. Palestinians would enjoy access to selected Israeli seaports and airports until foreign funds build Palestinian facilities. The other issue I could mention here is that Palestinians to accept continuous, and this is probably going to be one of the contentious items, the new Palestine must accept continual Israeli military control over Palestinian borders, its air and sea access, and the Jordan Valley. This is done, of course, because the Palestinians have to wake up to the fact that, in fact, Israel legitimately has very serious security issues over here. That the Palestinians, whether under Fatah in Ramallah or Hamas in Gaza, has been nothing to prove a willingness for peaceful recognition and live in peace alongside the state of Israel. Now, this would also be something to do with the legal recognition by the United States of the larger Jewish towns in what they call the West Bank, which is basically would be 10% of the West Bank. I'm talking about places like Ariel, Ma'ale Adumim, etc. And the other thing that would definitely be in there with the Palestinians, if they have a state, would have to give up on the right of return in favor of compensation. In other words, once they have a Palestinian state, they can have no claims on sending a million or so Palestinians back into non-existent towns and villages within Israel proper. In other words, it should be an end of conflict resolution or negotiation. I think also a lot of the Arab states will be invited to take part in these negotiations and terms as well. Certainly, our United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia will be asked to contribute financially and also to put pressure on the Palestinians to accept these sort of conditions. So Basically, when these terms and the peace plans are going to be announced in the middle of May, I think a lot of the success or failure from the Israeli point of view is with the constituency of the next Israeli government. I would suggest that even if Benjamin Netanyahu creates what's called a center-right government, and then the peace plan comes down, instead of just asking his partners in the coalition to accept this, my feeling is that the Israeli prime minister will take the Trump administration's peace terms into the Knesset for a vote, knowing very well that even if people like blue and white, Freudian slip, blue and white were sitting in the opposition, and a major part of the opposition, don't forget with 35 seats, that they would comply and use it, in fact, to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu to accept the Trump administration's peace agreement. So I see no obstacle there. I see the devil in some of the details, but generally, Israel will prove itself, as it did in the last election, and this is where I make a wrap, to be basically at heart a center party, whether it's the Likud center right or whether it's blue and white center left. All the other parties really only come up to about from 4 to 7 or 8 seats in the party, in the Knesset. So the heart of Israel, despite anything you may hear about, we now have a far-right racist government here, the electorate clearly showed by 69 seats going to the two center parties that its heart is in the right place. And like as always, we are still open for practical and affirmative peace agreement. This is Barry Shaw. Hey. If any of you have any questions or comments to be made, I'd be happy to hear from you. You can contact me at theviewfromisrael@gmail.com. That's a long word, but it's theviewfromisrael@gmail.com. I'll be happy to hear from you and send you answers. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Shalom from Israel.